When I finished up the last lecture, we were still in the middle of Mesopotamia and talking about these creatures called the Lamassu creatures that were used by the ancient Assyrians. And we talked about the design of them and how they have 5 legs, but that's just so you can be seen walking from the, seems natural from the side view, profile view, and frontal view. But the 3/4 view is obviously not very good. And as I mentioned in the last class, these were guardians of Assyrian sites, and they had human faces with sort of a ram's body but wings, and have the long Mesopotamian beard, and then that crown with horns, which shows that it is a deity, because in ancient Mesopotamia, deities had crowns with horns on them. There's even one Akkadian, much earlier Akkadian leader who takes on the pretenses of being a god and wears a crown with horns on it. And then later, when his empire is destroyed, they say it's because he pretended to be a god, etc. But in any case, I wanted to point these out to you as really interesting pieces of art. And here it shows, Nineveh when it was still being excavated. And they have yet to go through that gate that you can see the sides of behind the gentleman standing there. That still has to be excavated out. What's interesting too is we have even depictions that has been colorized in the bottom left here of them transporting these Lamassu creatures. They carved them out and drag them to their temples. And it shows these extraordinarily large public works that the people would do to make these spectacular structures. And on the top center, we see what it was looking like when they were first excavating it. These have unfortunately suffered a lot under ISIS, who came in and destroyed many of them. And fortunately for us, a lot of the ones that we have are in the British Museum or the Louvre, but they took off the faces here because they're being extremely, strict in their interpretations of Islam and not allow the depictions of faces. And this has been quite tragic for these pieces of art. I mentioned this in the last class that, the Baghdad Museum was looted in 2003, and then this has happened more recently with ISIS. They even went and, blew up the site of Nineveh with ziggurat and all. And there's been a few people as detrimental to the ancient societies of Mesopotamia than as ISIS. The one on the left gives you a fallen head there, just to give you an idea. Some of the sizes of these are just unbelievably large. Now the Assyrians would spend their summers. The kings would go out every summer and try to conquer more and more land. And on this map, we see in the dark green the Assyrian Empire heartland where Nineveh is, along the Tigris there. And then it would spread out, and we can see progressions through time of how much land it takes. I do want to point out here that though it takes all of Mesopotamia and all of the eastern Mediterranean coast and Egypt, it doesn't take the Hebrew city of Jerusalem. This map is a little bit off here. It takes all these areas, but not Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was extraordinarily well protected. If you look on the right here, we see the ancient Hebrew states of Israel and Judah. And you can see Jerusalem with the star there at the northern part of Judah. This was the capital and where the temple was for the Jews. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And which would control would hold the Ark of the Covenant, etc., and is still to this day the holiest place for Judaism. But they would get in, but the Assyrians were never able to take Jerusalem itself. It's a big walled city. However, the Babylonians would invade in 560, and they would well, that's the size of Babylonian Empire at 560. They would invade a bit earlier than that, and they would conquer the Assyrians, and they would move their capital from Nineveh, which we see in northern Mesopotamia along the Tigris, down to Babylon on the Euphrates, a little bit to the south of it, and then we see to the lower right. So, giving us an idea of where these major cities were along Mesopotamia, in Mesopotamia. Though the Assyrians were never able to take it, the Babylonians would. They would take Jerusalem, and this would cause a very important historical event that still affects us to this very day, and that was that they would empty the city of Jerusalem and take all of its peoples back to there to work on structures, on buildings in their society. But they were not building a tower to Babel. They just said that for reasons I'll explain in a moment. They were building, working on this gate, the gate of Ishtar, which is now in a museum in Berlin. I believe the Pergamon Museum. What the Babylonians did is when they conquered people, they took people from a bunch of different lands and would take them back to Babylon and force them to work for them and help them build things. And that was just, that was the nature of ancient empires. The reason, here's just another shot here, just to show you some these wonderful blue glazed bricks with golden ones, not real gold, golden color, but they also come out this is on the left. They jut out from the flat area behind it, and we have some wild animal here with some mythical creature with crazy legs, etc. And by the way, you should go over to the RISD Museum. They have one of these panels. It's of a bull, but one of these panels from the actual panels from the wall, from the Ishtar Gate. But the reason what happened with the Babylonian captivity for these about almost 50 years, where the people of Jerusalem were held in captivity, along with many other Hebrews, is that they were confronted with a whole bunch of people that spoke a bunch of different languages. And that's where we get the word Babel from, quite frankly, because they went there and there was just people speaking a whole bunch of different languages that they didn't understand. And out of fear of that, in the Babylonian captivity, the ancient Hebrews decided they wanted to write down their stories, where they're from, etc. And from that, we get much of the many parts of the Old Testament. This is when the Bible starts getting written. Now, I do want to point out that the Bible, as an oral tradition, O-R-A-L, tradition, goes back a lot longer. And it's like Homer, where it's passed down from people to people. And when that's just how it was maintained, just like the Iliad and the Odyssey. But here they got fearful that they were going to lose their culture. So they decided to start writing things down. And so the Babylonian captivity is very important for history, very, very important. I do want to point out, by the way, so this is in the 6th century BC. Well, we used to think that that's like the 500s of BC. We used to think that was some of our earliest writing, and writing went back to about 2500, 2600 BC. But now we know because of archaeology in the 19th and 20th century that's written down only halfway through the history of writing. We now know that the writing of the goes back to about 3000 BC. So the Old Testament is actually written about almost around halfway through the history of writing. And this great Babylonian gate, shows people like here on the left, different kings and soldiers, etc. And here we can see the clothes showing that they are from, what societies they're from, and they wear different clothes and they carry their arrows, etc. On the bottom right, you get an idea of the size of it with the people there. And once again, we see this a better shot of that, what I was showing you before, of that creature. And I really recommend you go to the RISD Museum and see the bowl that is there. Really, just really impressive. But in any case, so they wrote down their stories, and the Hebrews, and that's how the Old Testament, much of the Old Testament, gets written, and they start recording these. And here are just some more shots of the site and some reconstructions on the right. The Babylonians, were able to take Jerusalem and bring the Hebrews back to Babylon to work in what's called the Babylonian captivity. They were released in 539 BC by the Persians, who would invade and create the greatest empire at that time. I believe I was touched on this before, and they are from the modern day country of Iran. Iran is where the Aryans live, the first Indo-European speakers, and as I believe I discussed before, the word Aryan has been bastardized by the Nazis. But prior to the Nazis, the word Aryan simply was a term that described the first people to speak Indo-European languages, i.e. the founding language of all European languages, as well as the languages in the Indus River Valley. And also, by the way, ancient Persian and modern Farsi. The Iranians are close, or their language is much closer to English than Arabic is. But in any case, they with their capital Persepolis, we can see right above the capital letters of Persia is their capital. And they would go into India, and they would go into Egypt, and they would take all of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and even go into Greece, which I'll come back to in a little bit. They would also, I would just want to point out, build huge road systems, like the Royal Road we see here going from Sardis all the way down to Susa. And they were famous for their messenger system. Herodotus, our first historian, describes the Persian messengers as, neither rain nor sleet of snow, etc., will delay them from delivering their parcels. It's the motto for the American postal system is taken from Herodotus' description of the Persian messenger system, which was apparently similar to the Pony Express, where they'd have messengers ride at full gallop. And every day there would be they could stop and arrest and get a new horse and go on from there. And able to get messages around pretty quick. It's important to keep in mind that once you have an empire this big, your biggest problem, as I believe I said before, was that you don't know if the generals are following your orders or not. And or once the place is conquered, if the governors are following your orders. And so you have to be able to get messengers back and forth pretty quick. Now, it is this empire, the Persian Empire, that once again comes out from modern-day Iran to the east of the Tigris and Euphrates, but to the west of the Hindu Kush, and a little bit, well, where it says the plateau of Iran. They spread out from there, and they go into 1, 2, 3, at least 3 other continents in this largest of empires so far in history. And it is here, the northern part, near where it says Media, that the Behistun inscription was found. And we talked about this in the last class. This is the inscription that allowed Henry Rawlinson to take or to decipher the cuneiform languages. He was and because the Persians put up this huge carving and showed that they'd conquered all these other tribes. This was just, by the way, within Persia. This wasn't the conquest of everything. And then once again show their god Zoroaster. If in the winged orb on the top, I mentioned that in the last class. Pay attention to these winged orbs. We'll see them in Egypt. And in this case, they have Zoroaster, the deity, sticking out from that. They were what's called Zoroastrians. In any case, that's how we've deciphered the cuneiform scripts and can read everything. Now, they put their capital at a place which is called Persepolis, the polis of the Persians. And here we see the main gate at a place called the Apadana. It'll be on a slide in a moment. And the name of it, that is. And we can see this procession of soldiers under the stairwells here with these lions hunting these stags and killing them, showing power. Once again, above them, right below the crenellations, we see the winged orb yet again. And here are some other shots of it, where the men, once again, we see them a bit more distant on the right here. But on the left, you can see they would come up from the entrance and walk up the steps. And we can see more of these people actually stepping up the steps. And so they're doing exactly what they would do when they were there. What this is representing are the events that would occur at Persepolis, with some sort of tribute being brought to the king. Now, this showing the events that occurred there is very important because this is going to have an influence on the Parthenon, which I'll come back to in a little bit. Once again, we see here the bull attacking the stag. Once again, the quite muscular animals here, and showing strength. Now, the great Babylon would be taken by an ancestor of this guy Darius, but Darius would be the important king for us because he would be the one that would go into Greece, and that would have impacts on for what I'll show you in a moment. But and under his reign is when the empire would be the strongest, and they would take Egypt. And remember that, because we'll get to, when we talk about Egypt, we'll sort of end with when the Persians take it. And by the way, I should point out that the Persians are Indo-European speakers, so they're very early Indo-European speakers, as I mentioned, touched on before. And here is the Apadana, just some shots of it. It is called the Temple of a Thousand Columns. And it's I would love to go and see it. It's a bit difficult to see for Americans right now, but we can see the use of these columns. It's missing the roof and a lot of other structures, obviously, but we'll see that this will have a great influence on the Greeks. And just some more shots of it. I showed you actually. I said that these men walking up the steps I showed you before were at this gate. No, there was other ones. But in any case, you get an idea. The relief sculpture of showing people what they do there. And I just want you to keep that in mind, because that concept will be reflected in the Parthenon, the very famous Parthenon, which I'm sure or hope you've all touched upon in Civ. It's shown here on the right. It's the temple to Athena in Athens, which is Athena is their patron deity, and the marbles associated, the Elgin marbles, on the bottom right here. Now, here's how what's interesting about the Persians, and we see here that they have this massive empire. Once again, it was the largest empire in the world at that time. They would go into Greece, and the Greeks would be presented with a David and Goliath scenario, and they were David, and they thought for sure they would lose, but they would win in 490 BC at the Battle of Marathon, when Darius would invade. He's very distraught by the fact that he's lost this battle, so he spends 10 years start redoing his army for the Western Empire and his navy for the Mediterranean. Keep in mind that the Persians had to have navies for the Persian Gulf, for the Red Sea. At that time, obviously, the Red Sea was not connected by the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean. They'd have a navy there and a navy in the Mediterranean. So it takes a while to rebuild their navy and army. And in the process of between at 490 invades, 486, I think right there he dies, and his son Xerxes takes over. And he tries to invade, and he's successful in taking Athens, but not much more after that. And in the process, he tears down the old Parthenon. And so a new Parthenon would be built, and the one we know of, the one that has had extraordinary influence on Western architecture ever since. You cannot go to any part of any, state capital in the USA that doesn't sort of reflect the neoclassical desire for, that is a period when, the Western world is trying to copy the Greeks and the Romans, and you see this all through Europe as well with structures built at that time. That is to say, in a couple of centuries ago, they would copy these temples when they were sort of reacquainted with them. And then the very famous Elgin marbles that went around them, which are now in the British Museum, and I'll talk about those later on. But this wonderful structure, we know when it was built, who built it, and how. And it has these very, very specific historical dates. And that's because the Persians went in and destroyed it. Soon after that, by the way, their navy would lose at the Battle of Salamis, and once again, the Persians would be repelled out of Greece. Once again, to everybody's great surprise, I mean, put it this way: people like the Egyptians and the various empires in modern-day Turkey, like the Hittites, etc., they couldn't stand up to the Persians at the time. And in fact, the Persians were stunned that they lost these battles. But they did. And this would have a very important part in history. And it would cause also the writing of our first history book by Herodotus, which is about the Persian Wars. So this whole historic event we know a lot about. We know a lot about it because of Herodotus as well. But I just want you to pay attention to all the areas they've taken. They will take Egypt and take a whole bunch of areas. And in this process, I forgot to mention the whole. One of the important things about the Persians is that they release the Jews from Babylon. And that ends their Babylonian captivity, and they're allowed to go back to Jerusalem and reoccupy it. But now they would reoccupy it with the beginnings of, much of the Old Testament written down by them. And it was for, once again, when the Babylonians had taken over Jerusalem, and then the Persians would release the Hebrews from Babylon, and then go, after they conquered the Babylonian Empire, and then go on to take Egypt and those various empires in modern-day Turkey, and go into Europe, but fail around Athens. And so we're going to stop there with the Middle East for right now. That is to say, with Mesopotamia in that area. We're going to move over to Egypt in the next lecture. But near the end, I'll try to come back and pull these all together under the Egyptians, or under the Greeks and the Romans, but I'm sure you've touched on those a lot in Civ, so we won't go too much into it, but talk about just what implications those societies had on the rest of Western society, and how much, in fact, they had taken from the societies before them. And that's one thing that we don't get taught too much of, is just how influenced the ancient Greeks were by the Egyptians and the people of Mesopotamia. And with that, I'll end this lecture.